dealing with theater and literature and music and such. And I've really taken quite a chance by delving into a subject that I have not really explored much in the past. And this is the meeting of the culture of the Western world and the culture of the Eastern world, thus the title East Meets West. And for those, I know we have a few newcomers to my courses at the center, but for those of you who are veterans, how do I always begin one of these classes?
With a song.
With a song. Yes,
song.
And usually it is a parody of a well-known piece that's tangentially related to the subject. And I thought that in dealing with the subject of Orientalism, I would try to use something that is a case in point. In this case, it's one of my great loves, one of my great avocations, namely Gilbert and Sullivan, who in I think 1887, I think, or 1886, created one of the great operetta masterpieces, namely The Mikado, object lesson in Orientalism. And I decided to use the song that introduced the character of Coco, the executioner of the town of Titipu, a song that begins with the lines, as someday it may happen that a victim must be found. I've got a little list. I've got a little list of society offenders who might well be underground, but who never would be missed. So many of you must know this piece, but for those of you who aren't fans of of GNS, here is a chorus or two of this song, sung by the inimitable John Reed of the D'Oyly Carte Opera Company.
As someday it may happen that a victim must be found, I got a little list of society offenders who might well be underground and who never would be missed. There's the pestilential nuisances who write for autographs, or people who have flabby hands and irritating laughs, or children who are up in dates and floor you with them flat, or people who in shaking hands shake hands with you like that, and all third persons who on spoiling tete-a-tetes insist. They'd none of them be missed.
He's got them on the list, and they're gonna be missed. They're gonna
And we'll just leave it there for now, just to give you a sense of the tune. So here is my version, and I call my version of the piece The Orientalist. Okay, here it goes. If you want to feel ecstatic every Tuesday till the spring, I simply must insist you look upon my list of the topics Asiatic in this patter song I sing, delivered with a twist by an Orientalist. I'm an expert from America with knowledge that commands the lore of Asian cities, the Shanghais and Samarkands. This Occidental brainiac excels when he explains the way to tell the Hindus from the Buddhists and the Jains. My supreme superiority no natives can resist, although they may be pissed at this Orientalist. You may want to shake your fist and decry that we exist, but you really can't resist this Orientalist. There's that merchant Marco Polo, when Cathay he came upon, outdazzled and outblissed. That Orientalist, he became an emissary of the mighty Kublai Khan, a fine diplomatist, that Orientalist. And that polymath, Sir Richard Burton, readers all applaud. Arabian Night translations that surpass Scheherazade. Aladdin told in Arabic is maddening, he believes. The same for Ali Baba and for all the 40 thieves. Burton's literary elegance can't rightly be dismissed. This English Arabist, this Orientalist, you may want to shake your fist and decry that we exist, but you truly can't resist an Orientalist. There's that Janissary music, Mozart's Rondo à la Turk. Herr Wolfgang, ja, ist ein Orientalist. Even Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, that stunning masterwork, has measures that are grist for the Orientalist. In the opera house, there's Turandot and Butterfly to boot. Delibes, Bizet, and Massenet, Parisians we salute. And then there's the Mikado, Gilbert yoked with you know who. The king and I in Kismet, and the rest I leave to you. They're exotic and inscrutable and shrouded in a mist. We simply can't exist sans Orientalist. Let me put it in a gist. East and West should coexist. Mine's a course that can't be missed. My Oriental list.
Bravo!
And as I always say, now that I've figured out the song, I know that I can teach the course. That's the way it always works. So, Orientalist, I mean, that song was a great, I don't know, a great exaggeration, a great sort of parody of an Orientalist, but that's kind of the, I don't know, the avenue that I decided to take, because I guess the original reason why I decided to get on this tack was because I happened to be watching Jeopardy, and I happened to hear a question about the 1001 Arabian Nights, and I was interested to hear what the answer was, but I was also thinking, my goodness, that's such a cornerstone of the culture, and yet I know so little about it. You know, why is that? And I thought, well, golly, this might be a subject matter that I ought to explore. And I thought maybe I could explore it in the context of this class. But as I started getting into it, I suddenly started realizing that this was going to be a touchy kind of subject, because it seemed like all the things that I wanted to explore really wasn't pure, studies, coming from the countries of Asia, China, Japan, India, and the Middle Eastern countries. It wasn't simply those products. It was these artworks that were Western views of Eastern culture. And it made me think, well, this might be kind of a dangerous track to go on, because it is kind of, in a sense, not really taking advantage of the authentic, heritage of the Oriental countries, of the Eastern, Far Eastern, Near Eastern countries. It's a Western imagination's view of it, and I think that you could very well talk about this kind of phenomenon, the notion of viewing the East through the lens of the West as Orientalism. And this term has become in recent years kind of a term of I don't know, not the most favorable kind of term. And this is largely due to a person who wrote a book called Orientalism, published in 1978. And that author is named Edward Saeed, a Palestinian-American scholar who taught for many years at Columbia University. And he began to feel, his main occupation really was studying Western literature, but he began to feel that I don't know, the culture of Asian peoples were not really being interpreted very well by the West, because they really weren't getting their information from the East. They were getting it from people from the West who really didn't have necessarily that kind of firsthand cultural experience. And so he decided to write this book called Orientalism as his answer to that Western, I don't know, propensity to do this. And I thought it might be interesting for us to actually hear the voice of this scholar, Edward Saeed, in giving his point of view. So this is about maybe a 5 or 6 minute clip of some of his thoughts on how he got started in exploring this subject in a serious way. So let me turn this on for you and turn it on.
Well, my interest in Orientalism began for two reasons. One was an immediate thing, that is to say, the Arab-Israeli War of 1973, which had been preceded by a lot of images and discussions in the media and the popular press, about how the Arabs are cowardly and they don't know how to fight and they're, always going to be beaten because they're not modern. And then everybody was very surprised when the Egyptian army crossed the canal in early October of 1973 and demonstrated that, like anybody else, they could fight. So that was one immediate impulse. And the second one, which has a much longer history in my own life, was the constant sort of disparity I felt between what my experience of being an Arab was and the representations of that one saw in art. I mean, I'm talking about very great artists, like Delacroix and Ingres and Gérôme and people like that, novelists who wrote about the Orient, like Disraeli or Flaubert. And, the fact that those representations of the Orient had very little to do with what I knew about my own background in life. So I decided to write the history of that. If somebody, let's say in the 1850s or 60s in Paris or London, wished to talk about or read about India or Egypt or Syria, there would be very little chance for that person to simply address the subject, as we like to think, in a kind of free and creative way. A great deal of writing had gone before. And this writing was an organized form of writing, like an organized science, what I've called Orientalism. And it seemed to me that there was a kind of repertory of images that kept coming up, the sensual woman who's there to be sort of used by the man. The East is a kind of mysterious place full of secrets and monsters. The marvels of the East was a phrase that was used. And the more I looked, the more I saw that this was really quite consistent with itself. It had very little to do with people who had actually been there. And even if they had been there, there wasn't much modification. In other words, you didn't get what you could call realistic representations of the Orient, either in literature or in painting or in music or any of the arts. And this extended even further into descriptions of the Arabs by experts, people who had studied them. And I noticed that even in the 20th century, some of the same images that you found in the 19th century amongst scholars like Edward William Lane, who wrote his book on the modern Egyptians in the early 1830s. And then you read somebody in the 1920s, and they're more or less saying the same thing. One great example that I always give is that the wonderful French poet, Gérald de Nerval, who went on a voyage to the Orient, as he called it. And I was reading this book of his travels in Syria, and there was something very familiar about it. It sounded like something else that I'd read. And then I realized that what he was doing almost unconsciously was quoting Lane on the Egyptians, on the theory that the Orientals are all the same, no matter where you find them. I mean, it's in India or in Syria or in Egypt. Yeah. It's basically the same essence. So there develops a kind of image of the timeless Orient, as if the Orient, unlike the West, doesn't develop. It stays the same. And that's one of the problems with Orientalism, is it creates an image outside of history of something that is placid and still and eternal, which is simply contradicted by the facts of history. You see, so in that one sense, it's a creation of you might say an ideal other for Europe. there was a kind of break that occurred after Napoleon came to Egypt in 1798. I think it's the first really important modern imperial expedition. So he invades the place, but he doesn't invade it the way the Spaniards invaded the New World, looking for loot. He comes instead with an enormous army of soldiers, but also scientists, botanists, architects, philologists, biologists, historians, whose job it was to record Egypt in every conceivable way and produce a kind of scientific survey of Egypt, which was designed not for the Egyptian, but for the European. And of course, what strikes you, first of all, about the volumes that they produced is their enormous size. They're a meter square. And all across them is written the power and prestige of a modern European country that can do to the Egyptians what the Egyptians cannot do to the French. I mean, there's no comparable Egyptian survey of France. To produce knowledge, you have to have a power to be there and to see in expert ways things that the natives themselves can't see.
We'll just stop there. Oh, that's pretty powerful. And what's interesting is how Saeed talks about how this ability to glean and systematize knowledge as being an adjunct to political power. I think that's a really interesting notion, that these people who were, these Orientalist people who were, gathering all this information and putting them in dictionaries and encyclopedias and monographs, etc., that they oftentimes were the people who were advising the politicians, advising the statesmen, advising the military people who were possibly in the process of trying to, maybe take over a particular portion of this Eastern world. Knowledge as kind of the handmaiden of political power. That's another aspect of this study. Let's actually dip into a few pages of this. And what you find so often in this book, and some of the people that he quotes, is this kind of undertone of condescension. This notion that our culture is superior to that other culture, and thus we have the ability to come in and take over and show them the better way to do things. So, for example, he quotes this English politician of the early 20th century, Arthur Balfour. And this is, I think, him addressing Parliament, talking about some of these possessions or protectorates that the British had in the Near East or Far East. And he says, first of all, I take up no attitude of superiority, but I ask, who has even the most superficial knowledge of history if they will look in the face the facts with which a British statesman has to deal with when he is put in a position of supremacy over great races like the inhabitants of Egypt and countries in the East? We know the civilization of Egypt better than we know the civilization of any other country. We know it further back. We know it more intimately. We know more about it. It goes far beyond the petty span of the history of our race, which is lost in the prehistoric period at a time when the Egyptian civilization had already passed its prime. Look at all the Oriental countries. Do not talk about superiority or inferiority. So, here, Balfour is kind of soft peddling the notion that we should think about terms like superiority or inferiority. But, even the people with the best of intentions, Saeed suggests, tend to fall into the trap. So let's read what Saeed has to say about this. He says, two great themes dominate his remarks here and in what will follow: knowledge and power, the Baconian themes. As Balfour justifies the necessity for British occupation of Egypt, supremacy in his mind is associated with our knowledge of Egypt and not principally with military or economic power. Knowledge to Balfour means surveying a civilization from its origins to its prime to its decline. And of course, it means, and this is in italics, being able to do that. Knowledge means rising above immediacy, beyond self, into the foreign and distant. Sorry. The object of such knowledge is inherently vulnerable to scrutiny. This object is a fact which, if it develops, changes, or otherwise transforms itself in the way that civilizations frequently do, nevertheless is fundamentally stable. To have such knowledge of such a thing is to dominate it and to have authority over it. And authority here means for us to deny autonomy to it, the Oriental country, since we know it and it exists in a sense as we know it. British knowledge of Egypt is Egypt for Balfour, and the burdens of knowledge make such questions as inferiority and superiority seem like petty ones. Balfour nowhere denies British superiority and Egyptian inferiority. He takes them for granted as he describes the consequences of knowledge. And then he quotes Balfour again. First of all, look at the facts of the case. Western nations, as soon as they emerge into history, show the beginnings of those capabilities or capacities for self-government, having merits of their own. You may look through the whole history of the Orientals in what is called, broadly speaking, the East, and you never find traces of self-government. All their great centuries, and they have been very great, have been passed under despotism, under absolute government. All their great contributions to civilization, and they have been great, have been made under that form of government. Conqueror has succeeded conqueror, one domination has followed another, but never in all the revolutions of fate and fortune have you seen one of those nations of its own motion establish what we, from a Western point of view, call self-government. That is the fact. It is not a question of superiority and inferiority. I suppose a true Eastern sage would say that the working government, which we have taken upon ourselves in Egypt and elsewhere, is not a work worthy of a philosopher, that it is the dirty work, the inferior work of carrying on the necessary labor. And he then quotes Balfour further. Is it not a good thing? Is it a good thing for these great nations, I admit their greatness, that this absolute government should be exercised by us? I think it is a good thing. I think that experience shows that they have got it, far. I think the experience shows that they have got under it far better government than in the whole history of the world that they ever had before, and which not only is a benefit to them, but is undoubtedly a benefit to the whole of the civilized West. We are in Egypt, not merely for the sake of the Egyptians, though we are there for their sake. We are there also for the sake of Europe at large. So there is this kind of sense that we know better. We know their civilization better than they know it, and because we know it better, we are able to use that knowledge better for their benefit, and incidentally, for our benefit. So there's that notion about these so-called Orientals at large, but also in terms of looking at these people in the small. I think the way that some of these Orientalists, look at the Oriental mentality is similarly kind of condescending. And again, putting this, us superior versus them inferior dynamic at work. So this is a quotation from a governor of India, the last name of Cromer, and this is I think very characteristic of the attitude in terms of how he looked on these subjects of his that he ruled in India. So Governor Cromer speaks like this. To be more explicit, what is meant when it is said that the commercial spirit should be under some control is this, that in dealing with Indians or Egyptians or Zulus, the first question is to consider what these people, who are all nationally speaking, more or less in statu pupillari, in the status of a pupil, themselves think is best in their own interests, although this is a point which deserves serious consideration. But it is essential that each special issue should be decided mainly with reference to what, by the light of Western knowledge and experience, tempered by local considerations, we conscientiously think is best for the subject race, without reference to any real or supposed advantage which may accrue to England as a nation. If the British nation as a whole persistently bears this principle in mind and insists sternly on its application, though we can never create a patriotism akin to that based on affinity of race or community of language, we may perhaps foster some sort of cosmopolitan allegiance grounded on the respect always accorded to superior talents and unselfish conduct, and on the gratitude derived both from favors conferred and from those to come. There may then, at all events, be some hope that the Egyptian will hesitate before he throws in his lot with any future Araby. Even the Central African savage may eventually learn to chant a hymn in honor of Astrea Redux, as represented by the British official who denies him gin but gives him justice. More than this, commerce will gain. So the notion that the choice for the native is between gin and justice, either or. One more quote from this Governor Cromer. And again, this kind of condescension really cuts close in this quotation. Sir Alfred Lyell once said to me, "Accuracy is abhorrent to the Oriental mind. Every Anglo-Indian should always remember that maxim. Want of accuracy, which easily degenerates into untruthfulness, is in fact the main characteristic of the Oriental mind. The European is a close reasoner. His statements of fact are devoid of any ambiguity. He is a natural logician, albeit he may not have studied logic. He is by nature skeptical and requires proof before he can accept the truth of any proposition. His trained intelligence works like a piece of mechanism. The mind of the Oriental, on the other hand, like his picturesque streets, is eminently wanting in symmetry. His reasoning is of the most slipshod description. Although the ancient Arabs acquired in a somewhat higher degree the science of dialectics, their descendants are singularly deficient in the logical faculty. They are often incapable of drawing the most obvious conclusions from any simple premises of which they may admit the truth. Endeavor to elicit a plain statement of facts from any ordinary Egyptian. His explanation will generally be lengthy and wanting in lucidity. He will probably contradict himself half a dozen times before he has finished his story. He will often break down under the mildest process of cross-examination." Well, I'll just stop there. This book, really is just full of these kinds of pieces of evidence, not just from politicians, but from real scholars. People who you would say have a dispassionate interest in the matter, who have no political aim or no particular advantage to be gained. But in short, I think that Saeed had the proposition that there was this built-in bias in the field of Oriental studies, in studies of the Near and Far East, And he felt that things really had to radically change. So, when he had this book published in 1978, it was really like a hand grenade thrown into this this intellectual circle of Oriental studies. Really caused a tremendous furor. And I would say, if you want to maybe follow the lines of this debate, I would encourage you to search for a recording on YouTube that is actually sort of a debate sponsored by a group called the Middle East Studies Association, or by acronym MESA, MESA. And it's a debate that features Edward Saeed, and also on his particular side, the English writer Christopher Hitchens, and then an old sort of an old school Orientalist named Bernard Lewis, seconded by a writer for the New Republic, Leon Wieseltier. It's about an hour and a half of debate and questions, and I think it's a very revealing, cross section of the lines drawn in this debate on how studies of Asia should proceed in the present day and in the future. So, I would say that Saeed, in a sense, really kind of put a period on the traditional practice of Orientalism. And I think he sort of ushered in a new era for scholars in this field. And I think nowadays we classify this discipline of study as post-colonial studies, because I think that the earlier scholars in this field, largely beginning in the 18th century and really getting into a great sort of golden age of studies in this field, the 19th century. Again, we're always kind of using this particular palette of imagery and methodology, again, coming from a Western point of view. And Saeed's basically saying, we really can't use that lens anymore. We've got to start seeing these societies, these countries, from their point of view. We've got to start taking our cues from scholars in those countries. They've got to be, in a sense, being the primary explicators and explorers in these regions, and that that's got to be our sort of ground zero in terms of how we build our base of knowledge. So this is really quite a strong reorientation of this field. And again, this is pretty recent intellectual history, and it's this discipline is still being remade even as we speak. It's still not completely settled. This field is still very very contested. But meanwhile, I'm a non-Asian guy who has never been to Asia and does not speak any Asian languages, and I have proposed to give a class on this very topic.
Exactly. And there are no Asians. I don't see any Asians.
Goodbye, folks. I think the course has ended. It's been nice knowing you. Drive safely. We'll see you in the springtime. I'm out of here. No. I'm not going to get off that easy. So what do we do in the next 14 weeks? How do we approach this subject? So I would like to approach it from this point of view, that yes, we can very well agree with Professor Saeed that the West has looked at Asiatic countries from our particular point of view, and sometimes it's been a distorted point of view. sometimes it has been this kind of superior viewpoint that we've applied to Asiatic countries. Guilty as charged. However, I would like to offer the supposition that as much as we in the West have had a tremendous influence on Asiatic culture, since the 18th century, and we have, in a sense, semi-Westernized a lot of these countries, kind of a kind of cultural imperialism, if you will. I would also propose that Eastern countries in the Near and Far East, have had a tremendous influence on the Western mind and the Western culture as well. And, I think that, I could probably ask each one of you to name some aspect of Eastern culture, whether, it's in social practices or it's in politics or economics or literature or other things. And we could point to this and this in which the Orient has influenced the way we do business and the way we live life in the West. So would anyone care to ponder this and maybe contribute some aspect of our culture today in 2021 that has been affected, has been influenced by the way life is lived in the East? Anyone want to open up the survey?
Sushi.
I will.
Okay, my mother. Yes.
Yoga.
Yoga. Okay.
Yoga.
Yes,
That's
indeed.
just what I was going to say.
Fiber.
I have a feeling that probably 300 years ago, if you asked someone about yoga in European countries, they would look at you blankly and not knowing what you were talking about. But yoga has become part of our lingua franca and our personal practice in so many areas of the West. So yes, I thank you very much. And I heard someone say sushi.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that you
Sushi,
can find sushi in Wegmans or Tops or any other creditable supermarket in the Buffalo area speaks a great deal to the fact that that Japanese culture has made inroads in the way we arrange our diets. So though that's not an inconsiderable thing. Anything else that strikes your mind?
Puncture,
I'm sorry?
acupuncture.
Acupuncture,
Yeah.
the field of
Yes.
medicine, yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's even perhaps more recent to the West, maybe within the last, 40 or 50 years that no one probably had heard of acupuncture in Western countries before that. But now it's definitely being practiced quite frequently. Yes, so someone else.
Gardening.
Meditation.
I'm sorry, one at a time, please.
Oh.
Meditation.
Meditation.
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
Mm.
You're absolutely right. We certainly have many more people practicing that on a fairly regular basis. Yes, indeed.
On the air.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
gardening.
Gardening. Okay. Yes. I
Gardening.
think that.
Ikebana and
I'm sorry.
I said
Maybe she said bonsai.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Bonsai gardening. Okay.
Tai
Thank you.
Chi.
Tai Chi. Yes. Yes.
All I see is
I
that
shall.
unmade bed.
music.
Spices?
guitar music.
I shall.
Karate.
Karate.
Karate,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Spices. Yes.
Shall.
Yes. Definitely so. How about nonviolent resistance, nonviolent demonstrations?
Absolutely.
In the political realm? People like Gandhi. I mean that's something that affected the way the civil rights movement proceeded in America in the 1960s. That's a pretty big influence, I think, on our culture.
So what geographic areas are you encompassing as Orientalism in this study?
Well, Mr. Saeed was focusing mainly on the Middle Eastern countries, but we're looking at the entirety of the Asian continent. So yeah, we're looking at that as a great a great panoply of cultures. And and of course Saeed said that these people who talk about these countries, they talk about like all these different cultures are exactly the same. You treat the Indian exactly like you treat the Japanese, or you treat the Chinese, or you treat the Iraqi. They all basically have the same kind of mentality. The notion of trying to meld all these different peoples into one kind of mentality is one of the things that grates Saeed, that disturbs him, that people are being treated as this big monolithic mass, and it's so much more complex and nuanced than that. And that's what he hopes could be opened up more in this field of Asiatic studies, the sense of really treating all these different cultures as distinct entities that have their own identity, and that's something you really can only do from the inside, not from the outside. When he says, when you do this, you're creating these cultural stereotypes that may have a little tiny grain of truth, but oftentimes simply, again, create this sense of unreality, a certain type that doesn't necessarily relate to true individuals. So he was hoping at least for an Asiatic studies discipline that would take into account the great complexity and the great multiplicity of these peoples. So that's, I think, the nub of his dissatisfaction with studies of this continent, this great continent overall. Just it was something that was reductionist and simplified things for the Western mind, but didn't necessarily reflect the reality of things. So I don't want to go on about this too much longer, but I wanted to say that the way I wanted to approach this class is to look at the times when East meets West, when Western sensibility finds itself curious about this other continent, this other half of the world, and they come together in some kind of way. There is some kind of exploration, and that it affects the Westerner in a profound way, and that it's in that interpretation of the East by the Westerner that Western culture is changed. And there's something about misinterpreting things. The literary critic Harold Bloom wrote quite a lot about creative misinterpretation or creative misreading. That some of the most interesting things in literary history and otherwise have occurred when people, misread another great author. And in that misreading of that great author, they went off on their own and created something that was quite innovative, in spite of not really getting what that author meant. By the misinterpretation, they created something new. And I think in a sense, that's something that has happened time and time again in Western culture. We have taken aspects of Eastern culture, we've looked at it through our Western lens, and in the process, misinterpreted what we've seen and studied. And in the process of doing that, we have, in a sense, created something slightly different. We've adapted that aspect of the Oriental, of the Eastern, and we've created a different thing with it. And, you know, this has happened time and time again. And it has changed the way we live. It's changed the way we've looked at the world. And that's what I want to explore in this class. I'm not going to claim that we are going to look at the East with a completely clear and objective lens. I would not claim that at all. But we're going to take a look at the ways great artists in our culture have taken aspects of Eastern culture, Eastern living, and we're going to see how they have interpreted this. We'll see how they've adapted it, and we're going to, you know, see, is this reinterpretation, does it still have any worth, culturally speaking? We sometimes talk about cancel culture in recent years, and we talk about things that maybe are not worthy of our cultural attention anymore, that it's, you know, that's passé, it's outdated, and it simply is not worthy of our attention anymore. And I'd like every time we go through these subjects week by week, I think we're going to be putting that aspect to the test. We're going to be asking ourselves, is this something that is still valuable to us as you know, concerned and active and you know, vital you know, observers of Western culture? Is this something that we still can take as our cultural you know, our you know, our possessions, or shall we just leave that in the trash bin, as they say? So that's going to be my approach. We're going to be looking at this material not necessarily from a worshipful point of view, but in a sense, testing, you know, whether this is still, you know, worthy of being part of our cultural bric-a-brac or not. So, and we'll leave it to you, you know, to make that decision. But I think that'll be a very interesting way to examine some of this material. It's certainly not going to be comprehensive. I've just picked and chose a few things that were of interest to me, and I hope they'll be of interest to you. So I know I've given you quite a lot to chew on. This might be a good time to maybe open the floor to some of your thoughts on this matter. Anyone want to weigh in on what you've heard so far in this monologue?
Interesting.
Okay.
Okay,
Well,
I'll jump in.
okay.
When you were talking, I was also asking us about what we see now, the yoga, the meditation, and so forth like that. I was thinking about literature and movies and so forth, how things have changed. I mean, a very simple thing like in my day of visualizing China as Charlie Chan, and that's it. Our understanding of China was Charlie Chan.
Yeah, that's
and his hopeless son.
That's a pretty
literature.
reductionist view of China, I would say. Yes.
Right. And now China and other Asian countries have really almost taken a lead in their literature, in the movies that they put out, and other things like Parasite. A South Korean movie won an Academy Award last year.
Yeah. That's quite a watershed, I'd say. Yeah, and you know, that's another reason why this Orientalist discipline has to change, because now we have people in that part of the world who can speak and write for themselves. They can offer their point of view. There is this ability in the world of publishing and media in which they are able to get their point of view across to the West without having the need for Orientalists to mediate for them. And this is certainly a very salutary thing. And so that in itself is a reason why these, Asiatic study, departments have to change. They've got to be taking into account, the point of view of the people who actually live there, not just people living from a great distance in the West. So I think that's very crucial. The fact that our modern ability to communicate in a much more easeful way and greater ability to transport ourselves from one place to another make it so much easier for us to actually hear the point of view of the people and the scholars and the artists who live in those countries. So yeah, that's a very important thing. We're not just getting ersatz Orientalism like Charlie Chan, which probably weren't even written by Chinese
Probably not.
author, I'm sure it wasn't, so that's very important, that we really hear the voice of the people who live in those Eastern countries. Anybody else want to weigh in?
Yes, we never mentioned music and art, which is the second half of this course.
Yes, indeed. I don't know. I just have an affinity for musical subjects, and I think that's certainly something that all of us can, certainly find, a fascinating subject. And there certainly are such gloriously beautiful aspects of musical Orientalism, and even those who bridle at the notion of the way Oriental musical styles are distorted by the West. You can't deny the great beauty of some of these Western distortions of the Oriental world, musically speaking. And we'll be looking at a lot of that kind of thing in this class. That's my propensity, and I apologize if it's a little too much, but I just find all that really fascinating, and I hope you'll find some of your favorite musical moments looked at in this seminar. Did I see your Mr. Click? Yes.
You brought up.
I think Eastern religions have changed Western thinking to some degree.
Okay. Yeah, I dare say, in 300, 400 years ago in Europe, it was basically, the Roman Catholic Church and the protesting Protestant sects, and that was basically the only game in town. No one really had much of a knowledge of other religious points of view. And now we are much more aware that half the world or more looks to other religious traditions, and that certainly is another important viewpoint about this comparison of East and West. I got a book from the library recently that looks at the holy texts of four major Eastern religions, and it looks like a wonderful anthology of those sacred texts. And I'm not going to be really looking at the religion angle at all in this class. I do not have the expertise to do that. But I think in an ideal world, that really would be the great fundamental basis of any set of studies comparing Occidental and Oriental studies. That those world religions really are the fundamental mindset of these countries, and have to be known about in order to understand those people. So yeah, world religion, I think, is very important in any kind of studies of different countries. No question about it. Anybody else?
Michael?
Here? Yes.
One problem that we're going to have, I think.
I'm sorry. Linda Wagner. Yes.
You brought up the question of Turandot, but Mozart also wrote a very controversial opera called the escape for the seraglio. The seraglio is an Italian word meaning a Harlem.
Yes, yes.
So
That-
why is that important to Asia?
Talking about music.
Oh, yeah, but no, Asia, what was your point?
It's Oriental.
Yes, yes. We will actually look at the abduction from the seraglio next week. We will take a look at that piece. So I'm glad you brought that up. A little preview of coming attractions. And yes, Mozart definitely, as my song indicated, he had Orientalist tendencies himself, and I would say he was very enthusiastic in putting these so-called Orientalisms in some of his pieces. So we will definitely be looking at that next week. And someone else was trying to speak to,
Mike.
yes,
Turn
Sylvia,
your
yes.
volume up.
I was saying the evolution of textiles, silk,
Ooh,
fabrics, and
Yeah.
clothing, and
Absolutely.
all those
Yes.
styles.
Yes, silk was almost considered as valuable as money, I would say, in in the trade routes, in the commercial interchange between the Europe and Asia. This series of roads that connected Europe and Asia was called by a 19th century person the Silk Road, and I think rightly so, that this was something that was very much greatly admired and desired by Europeans, and really was China that was the great source of this great art of creating silks, this was just something that was something that the West didn't have the knowledge to create on its own. There are certain things that the East had had advantages of. They were ahead of us in so many ways, and this is one of those instances. So yeah, that's an important part of the story in terms of the interchange of ideas between East and West.
Michael, I think there's a huge difference between places like India, which were colonially governed for hundreds of years, and places like China, which weren't. And there's a huge difference in the response between places like that, and people in India still, to a certain degree, are defining themselves with reference to the colonial government which dominated the place for.
Yeah. So I mean, just the length of time that they had that influence of British colonial rule certainly had a great imprint on their culture without any question. Whereas a place like Japan, it certainly had its interchanges with the West in the 19th century, but was for a much briefer span of time, and yet they've become, in a surprisingly short amount of time, a very highly westernized culture. So they certainly they certainly were very quick in terms of picking up Western influences. But yes, the in terms of the chronology, I'd say yes, India definitely had much more time in terms of contact with the West. Yes.
Countries like China didn't think much about Western countries at all. I mean, it's such a vast place with so much so much distance between the emperor and the rest of his own territories, for example.
Yes, and then vice versa. The Western countries had very little awareness of China. So yeah, it was in a way kind of isolated, and it really did take a good amount of time for us in the West to have any kind of really vital connection with the Chinese nation. And so yes, that's a very true thing, Michael, as well. Yes.
My point is, when I was in high school in the 70s, this is Frank.
Yes, hi.
When I was in high school in the 70s and that, it was always that China is a sleeping dragon. The big threat that is sleeping dragon. You know, we always read about that. I just want to say that I think it's a wonderful view that we're looking at, but how can we, I mean, putting it in context, how can we look at the horrible treatment that many of these countries have with the caste system of women and of people? And like even looking at China today, looking at China today with Hong Kong, when they're taking, of course, our democracy isn't perfect, as we all can tell in our own past couple weeks. But the point of it is that the big thing that we have to overcome in this is the caste system and the fact of, you know, the politics aspect of it too, and how these people do not treat women with any kind of respect.
Well, you know, boy, it's so hard to answer these questions.
Yeah.
They're very hard questions. All I can say, generally speaking, is that I mean, there has always been a sense of hierarchy in societies, and you know, notions of democracy and I don't know, egalitarianism, say, they're fairly recent phenomena, I think, you know, and some countries have progressed quicker than others in this regard. And when you think about a nation with such a long history as China, you know, one of the oldest civilizations, and you think about, you know, how recently these kinds of principles have been going on in Western culture, it's just a small scintilla of time. So you have to look at these things in a fairly relative way, and again, you know, it takes time to mediate between these kinds of social hierarchies in these different countries, and different nations are going to make reforms in these hierarchies at different paces, at different rates of time, and you just hope that the hierarchies start to become less rigid rather than the opposite direction, you know, and that's the main thing I'd say most of us are looking for. So anyways, as they say, things do take time, you know, and we hope that people are at least going in the right direction. In any case, I think it'd be good for us to take a little break. Let's take 10. When we come back, let's take a look at one of our earliest examples, one of our earliest famous examples of what we would call an Orientalist, namely our friend Marco Polo. And when we come back, we will hear about some of the great marvels that Marco Polo uncovered when he made his trek to the east. So let's put a little bookmark in our Orientalist studies, and we'll come back in 10 when we take a look at those great adventures of Mr. Polo.
Very good.
You suggest that when he asks a question, we raise our hands and he calls us by name, because people are talking at the same time. He's getting aggravated and he hasn't seemed to do that.
Well, if I said anything, I was going to say something about being so close to UB and so many Asian students participating in, we need to understand where they're coming from. Where they're coming from. Oh, okay. And all the Asian artifacts I have in my house, which I think were influenced by touring colonial homes and stuff, you know, that I grew up. My dad was.
I don't know, I did something to my dad.
And my aunt had so many Asian artifacts, or pseudo-Asian. But in colonial homes that I toured, so many of them had like the blue that was Oriental.
No.
And pineapples were big, and it was like a real treat to have those.
Well, status symbol.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
most people weren't aware of
Yeah.
it. So
They're talking about egalitarianism now, but we had it then too.
Yeah. It's worse. I think it's worse then.
Yeah, you don't.
30 minutes.
We don't think of it that way.
Okay.
It's a status symbol of us being above them.
Come on. Okay. Put that over there.
Trying to hear Ronnie's or someone else trying to write. You're looking at some cooking launches. These are all the pieces that are left. I got them all out of the box.
Yeah. Oh. Oh. Yeah.
What is up here?
Oh, did you guys take a break?
Yes, we're taking a break.
Okay, I'm like, what happened to Michael? Okay.
We did them in.
He said, Cindy, you're taking over. So.
He had enough of us.
Okay, class
I
dismissed.
suggested you turn up your volume. So I can hear you.
You can see all the people I sent the link to at the last minute because it all has my name on it.
Look at the top above the numbers on your keyboard. Well, the second time, and I told Cindy. Okay, okay, bye.
Turntable was wrong. Oh, it's me.
Yeah, yeah, true. I think, you know what, I hurt my back this morning. I had the ballet stretch with weights, and then I had the yoga med. It's since 9:30 I've been going. And I feel my jammies, and yeah, I know. And I got this little thick kink in my back right now, it's killing me.
You're all set?
Uh-huh. Oh, well, that's a good idea. I've got one here. Okay, thanks.
It's perfect.
Okay, bye.
Did you use the pizza setting?
No.
Uh-oh, what are we eating? Looks good. What is it?
Leftover pizza.
Oh, wow. Can I have some?
There's a couple pieces left.
Okay, I'll be right over.
Of his own volition. Of his own.
Hey, Michael? It's Cindy. You're muted.
Yes.
Oh, it was suggested that, you know, since everyone or a lot of people are unmuted, that if they have something to say, if they could raise their hand and then you call on them, because I guess there
Okay.
were some people talking over top of each other.
Yes, I heard the comment and I agree completely. So yes, please either raise your hand when you want to speak or say your name and say, I have a comment. But yes, we have so many people. We have you know, maybe 25, 26 participants. That's the only way it can work if you really, you know, indicate that you have something to say. So, but you can't have everyone talking at the same time.
Yeah, and everyone can even mute themselves, and then if they do want to speak, they can mute themselves too.
Yeah, so keep yourselves muted until you have something to say, and then unmute yourself and say, this is so-and-so, I have something to say. I think that's the only way it can work.
Okay, great, thank you.
This is mute.
Oh, okay. So if I want to unmute it, I click that.
You're, yes.
Unmuted now, right?
No. Five.
Okay. The music you're listening to is from the score for a TV production all about Marco Polo, written by Ennio Morricone. And it's the main theme from that TV miniseries. I just like that theme. I thought it might be nice to have around for this this class. When I started reading the, oh my God,
What was that?
I don't know, heard some bizarre noise outside. Sorry. When I started reading the travels of Marco Polo, I came across a very familiar story in it that I certainly did not expect to find. It was the story that we all know of the three wise men who come to visit the infant Jesus. But it's told in a very different way than I've ever heard it before. And I would like to offer this as my first reading from the travels of Marco Polo, with your kind permission. So here we go. Persia is a very great province that was once very noble and powerful, but has now been smashed and ruined by the Tartars. In Persia is a city called Save, from which the three magi set out when they went to worship Jesus Christ. It is said, moreover, that the three magi are buried here in three huge and resplendent sepulchres. Above each sepulchre is a square structure topped with a dome of superb workmanship. Each lies next to the other, and their bodies are uncorrupted and have hair and beards. One was named Balthazar, the second Gaspar, and the third Melchior. Messer Marco questioned many of the city's inhabitants about the lives of the three magi, but no one was able to tell him anything except that they were three kings who were buried there long ago. But he was eventually able to find out what I will now tell you. 3 days further on, he came across a town called Kala Atashparastan, or in our language, the town of the fire worshippers. And that is a statement of fact, because the men of this town do worship fire. And I will tell you why they worship it. The men of this town say that far back in time, the three kings of their country went to worship a newborn prophet, taking with them three offerings, namely gold, frankincense, and myrrh, in order to establish whether that prophet was God, an earthly king, or a physician. For they said, if he takes the gold, he is an earthly king. If he takes the frankincense, he is God. And if he takes the myrrh, he is a healer. And when the Magi came to the place where the infant was born, the youngest of the three kings set off on his own to see him. He found that the infant resembled himself, for he seemed to be of the same age and appearance, and he came out filled with wonder. Then the second, a man of middle age, took his place, and in the same way the infant seemed to him, as he had to the other, to be of his own appearance and age. He too came away quite amazed. Then the third and oldest went in, and just the same thing happened to him as to the other two. And he emerged deep in thought. When all three kings were together, they told one another what they had seen, and marveling greatly, decided they would all go in together. So all three went together before the infant, and they found him with his own features and looking his real age, which is to say, just 13 days old. Then they worshipped him and offered him the gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The infant took all three offerings, and in return, he gave them a closed casket. And upon receiving it, the three kings set out to return to their own country. After they had ridden for some days, they resolved to take a look at what the infant had given them. So they opened the casket, and inside they found a stone. They were greatly puzzled as to what it might be. The infant had given it to them to signify that they should be firm as rocks in the faith they had embarked upon. For when the three kings had seen the infant take all three of their gifts, they had said that he was at once God, an earthly king, and a physician. And because the infant knew that the three kings had this faith, he gave them the stone as a sign that they should be firm and constant in their belief. But the three kings, not understanding why they had been given the stone, took it and tossed it in a well. The stone had barely fallen into the well when a burning flame descended from heaven and directly struck the well into which they had thrown the stone. And when the three kings saw this miracle, they were greatly dismayed and repented the act of throwing away the stone, for they saw clearly that it was a great and beneficent portent. They immediately gathered some of the fire and carried it to their country, where they placed it in one of their churches, a magnificent and ornate building. They keep it perpetually burning and worship it as God. And every time they make a sacrifice or holocaust, they roast it in this fire. If it ever happens that the fire goes out, they pay a visit to others who share their faith and who also worship the fire, obtain from them some of the fire that burns in their church, and go back to rekindle their fire. On no account would they take it unless it came from the fire I have told you about. And often they make a journey of 10 days to procure the fire. Now I have told you the reasons why the people of the country worship fire, and I assure you there are a great many of them. And the people of the town related and explained all these things to Messer Marco, and they are all true. I can also tell you that one of the three magi came from Save, one from Hawa, and the third from Kashan. Having given you a full report on this matter, I will proceed to tell you about many other cities of Persia and their affairs and customs, and I'll just leave it there for now. Well, you know, the three kings, I don't think they are mentioned in any of the four gospel accounts of Jesus's life. The three kings are an extra biblical affair, I think, right? Or at least an extra gospel affair. But the last place I expected to find a detailed account of the three kings was in the travels of Marco Polo. And this idea that these magi were part of a religion of fire worshippers, first of all, from some of the notes I've read, it suggests that they may have been magi or wise men in an ancient religion named Zoroastrianism. I don't know if that word means anything to you, but it certainly was, you know, a religion that was known very much in the ancient world, not quite as well known today. And there are some theologians and students of religion who believe that Zoroastrianism has a very much an influence on most of the major religions, both Eastern and Western, and could provide something of a cultural linkage between all these major religions. I think that's something that's definitely worthy of looking into. And, you know, I have to say, this notion of this idea that you keep this fire perpetually burning in their church, it kind of reminds me of the fact that there is this everlasting light in Jewish synagogues. Mm-hmm. Could there be an influence of Zoroastrianism on the Judaic religion? It's an interesting theory. I don't know. The kind of things that pop up in the travels of Marco Polo are quite marvelous. You know, it's called in its original title form, a tale of wonders, of marvels, and there are a lot of different kinds of marvels that we find in this book. Now, a lot of things I didn't know about the story, at least as it's come down to us, of Marco Polo, you know, I just had the impression that he went on this big journey across Asia on his own. But no, that's not the case. In fact, he was not the first person to take this big journey across the continent of Asia. He was preceded by his father and his uncle. So his father was named Niccolo Marco or Niccolo Polo, and his uncle named Mafio Polo, and they were tradesmen, they were merchants, headquartered in the city of Venice, Italy, a very big commerce and trading city, and they had outposts not only in Venice but also in Constantinople, in the Ottoman Empire. Actually, at the time that they made their journeys, Constantinople had been taken under control of European powers, and Venice had a portion of Constantinople under their control. So at times, the Polos, the father and the uncle, would go to Constantinople to do their commercial trading, and sometimes they would go further on into Asia. There was, I guess, a place in the along the the Caspian Sea. A place by the Black Sea called Sudak, and supposedly they had a sort of a house, a trading post in that town on the northern part of the Black Sea, where they also did commercial trade. So they were definitely traders who did not just stay close to home, but they traveled all through what we would call Asia Minor, to procure valuable things, jewels, spices, what have you, valuable rare garments, and oftentimes they did what they called trading on. They would make trades at this one post, and then they would use that money to go further on into the continent, and they would just trade as they go. So they really were the first pioneers in this Polo family to make inroads into Asia, and it's only because Marco Polo had the written account. It's only because he had the ability to get this down on paper and get this narrative of these Asian travels out to the wider world. That we think of Marco Polo as the primary adventurer or explorer, but it's really his his parent Niccolo and his uncle Mafio that were the first to travel in this direction. So I always had the impression that this was completely Marco Polo's own work and writing, but indeed this was a collaboration, because Marco Polo, when he returned from his travels to Venice, he happened to be involved in a conflict between Genoa and Venice, two great trading cities in the Italian peninsula that were rivals, and they were kind of fighting for their own commercial turf. So about 1297, let us say, there was this war between Genoa and Venice, and I think Marco Polo was involved in one of the battles at sea between Genoa and Venice, and unfortunately Venice lost, and Marco Polo, along with a lot of his fellow Venetians, were taken prisoner and held captive in Genoa. And it turns out one of his fellow prisoners in this prison in Genoa happened to be a writer, a creator of romances, with the very interesting name of Rustichello. And Rustichello, he was hearing some of the great stories that Marco was telling about some of these travels that he had made before being taken prisoner. And he said, basically suggesting that, these stories are too good to be lost, and that you really ought to, have these tales, these accounts written down. So supposedly Marco Polo had actually made, little journalistic entries while he was on these travels in Asia. And he brought back some of these little, journals. So I think that he probably asked his family to have some of these, booklets, brought to his the place where he was being held captive, and he was, so he could have some actual documentation that he could refer to when he would be relating these stories to this Rustichello. Rustichello was a fellow from Pisa. And he was more of a specialist in medieval romances, tales of Arthurian knights and the like. So, he was certainly not a historian. He was certainly not a sociologist. And he had a tendency, as you would expect, to romanticize and to, be on the side of a good story, not necessarily the documentary truth. So the travels of Marco Polo, they're definitely a mixed bag. There are a lot of things about it that definitely are keen insights and observations about various peoples and cultures in Asia. But there's also a little bit of, a little bit of fantasizing in there as well. And, to people, both readers of the travels during his lifetime and, in the, immediate aftermath of Marco Polo, a lot of these people just could not believe some of the things that were put into this account. A lot of people thought that Marco Polo was a fantasist. And then there are people, of the, current time who also have great doubts about the veracity of all of the things that Marco Polo wrote in his book. I mean, for example, there's this book that I put in my little bibliography by Francis Wood called Did Marco Polo Go to China? The notion that that Marco Polo never really got further than maybe, say, the Persian Empire, and that perhaps that he was just going with a lot of secondhand information in his accounts, this Frances Wood, she's a real specialist in Chinese history, and certainly knows a thing or two about the heritage of that country. So there certainly are arguments to be made by authors like that about whether Marco Polo just made up things out of whole cloth, or again simply giving secondhand accounts of some of these topics that he includes in the travels. So that certainly is an interesting point of view. But then again, you have other people who who have looked at these accounts and tried to kind of recreate what it was like to travel across Asia like Marco Polo did. Another reference that I found was a photographic survey of this trek across Asia by a photographer for the National Geographic magazine, and it's this wonderful little coffee table book, Marco Polo, A Photographer's Journey. And this photographer, Michael Yamashita, says very boldly, as I go through all these different places, and I'm following Marco Polo's narrative, I'm definitely recognizing places that Marco Polo is describing in the book. So he definitely, even after 8 centuries or so of the time, he still finds these connections where he feels that yes, Marco Polo is definitely setting down real facts about different areas and not just creating little Orientalist fantasies. So the modern reader has to negotiate between those two extremes and decide for themselves, what is real history and real documentary evidence, and what is misremembered or exaggerations. For a lot of people, the name Marco Polo, he became known as Il Milione, the million, because he used extravagant numbers in some of his descriptions of things, and the numbers of 100,000, 10,000, a million, oftentimes cropped up in his accounts, and people would throw up their hands, saying, "Oh, how I can't quite believe that something could be so numerous as some of the things that he's describing in the book." It's a very important thing to take into account that, yes, there probably were a lot of cases where Polo may have been not only mistaken, geographically speaking, but also, again, exaggerating the numbers, both, in terms of the cost of things, in terms of the numbers of soldiers, say, numbers of populations of cities, the number of gates surrounding a town, and that sort of thing. A lot of that kind of, again, exaggeration or romanticizing. So some of that may have been Marco Polo's own, extravagant nature as a personality. A lot of it may have been this, writer who he was sort of dictating his memories to. So that's something that readers have to negotiate as well. Another thing that I think needs to be faced for anyone reading this book is that if you're looking for this as a biography or memoir of Marco Polo, I think you're going to be sadly disappointed, because the personality of Marco Polo is almost non-existent in this book. You really find very little solid biographical information in terms of the sense of a real personality, a real individual. His name is on the book, but you really don't get a sense of a real flesh and blood person in a way. And in so many cases, you sort of have to infer a personality, and that brings a lot of people to grief when they try to dramatize Marco Polo. I'm sure that little TV miniseries in which Ennio Morricone wrote that theme, I'm sure they had to do a lot of creative work to create a sense of a real character, in that TV drama. There's a more modern TV series about Marco Polo that was produced by Netflix in 2014, and I actually saw that series. I borrowed the DVDs from the library, and they had to do a lot of inventing in that show. I mean, they tried to actually make him into some kind of kung fu martial arts hero, which really made me laugh. Very, very ahistorical. But again, when it comes to TV, the main thing is to be entertaining, not to be a documentarian. So I don't think Marco Polo, the real Marco Polo, had any kind of smarts with the martial arts. Oh golly, there's I found on YouTube a series of songs taken from a 1950s television program, a kind of a televised little musical about Marco Polo, starring Alfred Drake, the great Broadway baritone. And boy, they really had very little of the Marco Polo that's in this book. I mean, they had to invent a lot to make him a kind of a romantic hero for this kind of romantic operetta-like musical. So that certainly is not a feature of the book, The Travels of Marco Polo. He's trying to account for what he has seen. But as far as a portrait of the seer, you're not going to get a whole lot of that. There is kind of a little kind of story about about his uncle and his father and how he himself got to Asia in the prologue, but that is merely a pretext, merely a kind of a suggestion to the reader that yes, these things really happened to these people, so you should believe everything you read in the ensuing pages. But that was again merely to create a sense of that this was a real thing. This was not just a made-up story. This happened to real people. So I'd like to read a little bit from this prologue, where we get a sense of who these people are, and we get a sense of the territory that they covered. And by the way, I was rereading this yesterday, and I have to say it really helps you if you are looking at a map of Asia. So if you have this map that I copied and sent to you, I think it really would be worthwhile to have that in front of you whenever you are trying to read an account of these Marco Polo travels, because this is in essence a travel book. It's basically a guide for people who are trying to traverse the continent of Asia and trying to give a sense of what you will see when you go to this section or that section. It's not a memoir. It really is kind of like a Fodor's guide, in a sense, for the commercial traveler, the merchant who's trying to do business in Asia. Mary Lou, I saw your hand.
I don't have the map. I'm wondering if other people have it or where we were getting it. We printed things, but not a map.
Okay, so that may have been something that did not get to you. If so, I will try to send that to you or send it to have that sent to Cindy, and hopefully she will send it on to you. I thought I had sent that to her, and I thought it got to her, but maybe I'm wrong. I'll try it again, and if not, then we'll see what we can do to rectify that. But in the meantime, I found it very illuminating. I read this prologue first without any map in front of me, and I found it very puzzling, in terms of the movement across this landmass. But with the map, it's much easier to see what he's getting at. Anyhow, I'll read, and hopefully you can imagine a map in your mind. So he writes, at the time when Baldwin was Emperor of Constantinople, the year was 1260, it so happened that Messer Niccolo Polo, who was Messer Marco's father, and Messer Maffeo Polo, who was Niccolo's brother, were in that city, having come there from Venice with their merchandise. Without doubt, they were noble, wise, and far-sighted men. But after talking things over, they decided to head across the Black Sea in the hope of gaining new business and turning a profit. So they bought a large stock of dazzling and valuable jewels and set out from Constantinople, taking ship to Sudak. So that's that town on the north side of the Black Sea. When they had stayed in Sudak for a while, they resolved to press on still further. What else shall I tell you? That's a phrase that comes up a lot. What else shall I tell you? Leaving Sudak, they went on their way and rode without meeting with any adventure worth mentioning until they came to the court of the Berke Khan, lord of part of Tartary, who was then living at Bolgar and Sarai. So these are towns that are very far north of the Middle East. This is really in Russia, parts of Russia, sort of along the Volga River. So they really went quite far afield there. So he's talking about the Berke Khan. So Asia at this time was ruled by members of this Mongolian ruling family. So there were like four major divisions of the main Asia continent that were under the control of the Mongols. So there was the Great Khan, who basically controlled the Mongolia and China. There was what they called the Golden Horde Khanate, which was basically this section of Eastern Russia and Siberia, very far north. There was this part of sort of Central Asia that's just above India that they called the Chagatai Khanate. And then there was this portion in the Middle East, Iraq and Iran and Afghanistan, that was called the Ilkhanate. And so all these members of this Khan family descended from the great Genghis Khan, or Genghis Khan. All these rulers were basically like grandchildren or great grandchildren of this Genghis Khan. Whenever you get this map, you will see these divisions of these different khanates, these different kingdoms or khanates, these ruling divisions. So this Berke Khanate, this was the this Ilkhanate, this one that where they ruled in this Middle Eastern area. Let's see. Oh no, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. So that's actually the Berke Khanate was part of the Golden Horde in the northern part of Asia. Okay, so it says this Berke received Messer Niccolo and Messer Mafia with great honor and was highly delighted by their arrival. The two brothers gave him all the jewels they had brought, and Berke accepted them very willingly and was immensely pleased with them. And in return, he gave the brothers goods worth at least twice their value. He conveyed them to many places to sell these goods, and they fetched excellent prices. When the brothers had stayed a year in Berke's land, war broke out between him and Hulagu, the lord of the Tartars of the Levant. So there were these conflicts between these different khanates in Asia. So the ruler of the Golden Horde was suddenly at war with this ruler of the Ilkhanate in the Middle East. So because of this battle and this war, no one could travel along the roads without being abducted, or rather, no one could travel in the direction from which the brothers had come. If they went on ahead, they could travel freely. So they said to one another, "Since we cannot return to Constantinople with our goods, let us carry on toward the east. Then we can make our way home by a roundabout route." And they got themselves ready, and leaving Berke, made their way to a city called Ukek that marked the limit of the Western Khan's lands. And from Ukek, they crossed the river Tigris. Actually, the one note says that that's supposed to be really the Volga River. They crossed the river Volga, and for 17 days journeyed through a desert where they found no towns or villages, but only Tartars with their tents, living off their beasts. When they had crossed this desert, this is in the area today known as Uzbekistan, they approached a very large and splendid city called Bukhara. And the province was likewise called Bukhara, and its ruler's name was Barak. It was the finest city in all of Persia. So this would be sort of the northeastern part of Persia. By the time the two brothers reached the city, both the route ahead and the way they had come were impassable. And so they stayed there for 3 years. You can see this is not something for the faint of heart, this traveling across Asia. I mean, this could take years to make this continental crossing. This was truly, for only the most hardy travelers. So they were while they were living there was an envoy sent by Hulagu, the lord of the Levant, stopped off on his way to the Grand Khan of all the Tartars, who was named Kublai. So Kublai is the equivalent of Kublai Khan. And he lived at the end of the earth in an east-northeasterly direction. And when the envoy saw Messer Niccolo and Messer Mafio, he was astonished because no Latins, that's what they called Europeans, Latins, no Latins had ever been in that part of the world. "Sirs," he said to the two brothers, if you will trust me, you will find it greatly conducive to your profit and honor. And the two brothers said that they would readily trust him in any undertaking that lay within their power. The envoy replied, Sirs, I can tell you that the great lord of the Tartars has never seen any Latins and is exceedingly eager to meet one. So if you will accompany me until we reach him, I assure you he will be very glad to see you and will treat you with great honor and liberality. And with me, you will be able to travel safely and without any hindrance. So they agree to go along with him. And unfortunately, this envoy to the great Khan, the great Kublai Khan, is taken ill, and he is no longer able to make the journey. And the two brothers, Maffeo and Niccolo, have to go on their own by themselves onward to Kublai Khan. I mean, that's pretty tough. That's pretty tough. And finally, they actually do get there. And the narrator continues, when Messer Niccolo and Messer Maffeo arrived at the court, the great Khan received them courteously and held lavish revels and festivities in their honor. He was thoroughly delighted that they had come. He asked them many questions, first as to the emperors, how they maintained authority and justice in their lands, went to battle and acted in every way, and then about the other kings, princes, and other nobles. Afterwards, he asked them about the Lord Pope, all the practices of the Roman Church, and all the customs of the Latins. And in each case, Messer Niccolo and Messer Maffeo gave him a full and truthful account, speaking well and sagely like the wise men they were, and with a firm grasp of the Tartar language. So these tradesmen, they knew their Persian, they knew their Mongolian, they were able to converse in these popular Asian languages to the great Kublai Khan. So Khan tells them, okay, I'm going to send you back to Europe. You're going to have letters from me to the Pope, and I want you to bring back, I want the Pope to send me 100 representatives of the Roman Catholic Church, because I want them to be able to knowledgeably proselytize the proper Christian church to these folks in Asia. And he sends them on their way. He also asks for some holy oil from the sepulcher where Christ supposedly is buried in Jerusalem. So they go back. They go back to the Middle East, and they search for the Pope. And it turns out the Pope has died, so they can't do anything. They decide to go back to Venice, and they wait in Venice a couple years, and no Pope has yet been selected. So they decide they're going to take the bull by the horns and go back to China and go back to Kublai Khan, and they're going to take along 15-year-old Marco, this son that Niccolo has hardly seen since he left Lo those many years ago. He barely knows his son, but his wife has died, and I think that he feels obligated to take care of his son. And so he goes along for the ride. And when they finally do get to the court of Kublai Khan, it's many years later, I think about 1275, they meet Kublai Khan again, and it turns out that the great Khan is very charmed by this very young man, this Marco Polo, and let's see, let me see if I can find this reference. Yes, so the prologue continues. When Messer Niccolo, Maffeo, and Marco, when they arrive at this great city, they went to the chief palace where they found the great Khan and a tremendous assembly of barons. They knelt before him and made obeisance with the utmost humility. And the great Khan told them to rise and receive them courteously with great celebration and festivities in their honor. And he asked many questions about their circumstances and how they had fared since their departure. Two brothers replied that things had turned out well, seeing that they found him healthy and flourishing. And then they presented the privileges and letters the Pope had sent, which greatly pleased him. Next, they handed him the holy oil, which he received with great joy and prized very highly. And when the great Khan saw Marco, who was a mere stripling, he asked who he was. And Messer Niccolo said, "He is my son, sire, and your servant. I have brought him at great risk and trouble from these faraway lands to present him to you as your slave." And the great Khan said, "He is welcome." And he held him in great favor and had his name inscribed along those of the other honored members of his household, as a result of which he was greatly esteemed and valued by everyone at the court. So Marco seemed to have this great ability to describe things to the Khan, which he found very, very invigorating and very helpful, because other emissaries of the Khan, when they would go about their business, they would do their business, but they really wouldn't be able to describe to the Khan what these people were like and any interesting bits of interest about what these other parts of the kingdom were like. And he found them to be very desultory and not very exceptional in their work. And he tried giving Marco a little task, a little, minor diplomatic task, and said to truly vividly describe everything that he saw when he came back. And he was able to do that like none of these other emissaries of the Khan were able to do. So Marco became a very prized member of the Khan's contingent in the capital city of the city we now know as Peking or Beijing. And he really was kind of made a very valued member of his government bureaucracy. And he was sent numerous times on various diplomatic endeavors, sometimes helping with the collecting of taxes, sometimes, again, on some kind of embassy, some kind of representation to the local politicians. And he always found that Marco was able to come back and describe things in very vivid images. And it's these kinds of storytelling abilities that Polo was able to inject in these memoirs. And unfortunately, our time is pretty well up, and we really can't go into these great adventures. But as you can see, these times in China took a great number of years. I think the first trip by the father and the uncle took a good 14 or 15 years. And I think that this time when Marco was there, he was there for, close to 20 years. And, when he finally gets back and he finally has a chance to tell his story to this Rustichello in prison, it's been a long time, since he's been in Venice. He's like he's more Mongolian than he's really Italian or Venetian. So he's really telling this almost from the point of view of a Mongolian bureaucrat in a way. And he really has this mindset all through these travels, the point of view of someone who is a great follower of the great Kublai Khan in a way. And he lived long enough that in after years to see his, story being passed around from one person to another. It was not yet published, but it was passed around in manuscript from one person to another. And when people would say, ask him, did you exaggerate greatly? Did you fantasize? Did you simply dream up these stories about what life was like under the great Kublai Khan? Supposedly, near the time of his death, when he was writing out his will, and people would say, don't you want to recant? Don't you want to confess that all this is all a lot of hooey, all a lot of fantasy? And he said, so according to one account, he would say, I haven't given testimony to half of what I saw in Asia. I only gave you a small sampling of everything I saw there. So at least according to that testimony, Polo would have said that no, this is not something that is simply a glamorization of the great Asia continent. This is true testimony. The thing that I'd say most Europeans could not quite comprehend was that there could be a civilization perhaps even more grand, even more elaborate, even more rich, more colorful than life in Europe. The notion that we might be behind some of these areas in Asia, not ahead of them. So from my point of view, I think that Marco Polo was an Orientalist who did not condescend to the Asiatic peoples he saw. I think he tried to see them with very clear eyes, and he tried to, say that, this is the way they operate, this is the way they live in these nations, but I'm not going to judge them. I'm not going to, say that they're a lower form of humanity. He sometimes does give opinions about whether someone was morally suspect or something, but for the most part, he simply is trying to describe these unusual folkways, and he really does seem to at least allow the possibility that maybe this is a legitimate way of living for the people in this particular area. So I don't see the kind of Eurocentrism in Marco Polo's account that I think that you might find in another person's memoir of Asia travels of this time. I think he tries to be as objective as someone is able to be at that time. And I think that gives this account a very interesting flavor. So you decide for yourself when you get your copy of Marco Polo's Travels from your library or your bookstore, and you decide how much of this is hokum and how much of this is God's honest truth. But it certainly makes for a very interesting account, and I think this is definitely an important portion of the West's awareness of Asia, at least at this time. I think he was an important emissary bringing news of the East to Western readers. So I think that it's definitely an account that deserves to at least be taken seriously as an eyewitness to what this Mongol empire once was. In any case, we have to close up our tents for the moment. And next week, we will take a look at the way Western composers and musicians took the music of the Turkish traditions or the Ottoman Empire's traditions and made use of it in its own classical music and opera music. So I hope you'll find that an interesting look at another way that the West has taken on Eastern garb at times. And we'll see how even the greatest composers made use of this Turkish musical sound. So we'll say farewell for now, and I hope to see you next week at this same time and place. So thank you again, and have a good week.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Arigato.